with all of these fundamental things that I've talked about in our life processes, um, clinically, we found that PS benefits memory and other cognitive functions in older people. And, when we talk about clinical findings, we have to keep in mind that we only find, we only can talk about findings when we've done the trial. So it may well be that as time goes by, we'll find other benefits from PS. But at this point, the most established benefit is for memory and other cognitive function in older people, other higher brain functions, for um, for mood and coping with stress in younger people, for improved attention, impulsivity, and behavior in children and adolescents with ADHD. And interestingly, ADHD children and adolescents tend to have poor synaptic pruning. So it may be that when we can give them additional PS, their synaptic pruning may become more efficient. That may be.
Hello, Dr. Kidd. You are a pioneering dietary supplement expert who has helped antioxidants, omega-3s, and phospholipids become common themes in human healthspan research. So welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, Richard.
So Dr. Kidd, I mean, one of the supplements you've worked on significantly since the 1990s is phosphatidylserine. And so I want to talk about that one today because it's not that commonly spoken about, certainly in terms of longevity and brain health. So it's not a common supplement. So could you introduce phosphatidylserine, a little bit about the history, when was it discovered and since when has it been a supplement?
Well, phosphatidylserine, or PS for short, is a phospholipid nutrient. It is not a fat, though it's sometimes confused with fats. It may be a conditionally essential nutrient in that the body can make it, but may not always be able to produce it in optimal amounts, particularly as we get older. And PS is a key molecule for building the membrane systems that make up our cells. So membranes are thin double layers of molecules that carry most of the enzymes and other proteins that are crucial for our cells to work. Each of our cells contains an outer membrane that separates it from the surrounding environment of the cell, and series of inner membranes that create specialized functionalized compartments within the cell. So if you want to think of bubbles within bubbles, with the actual surfaces of the bubbles being alive, these cell membranes are loaded with busily working proteins, transporters, signal receptors, signal converters, energy generators, proteins for cell construction, for repair, for cell maintenance. Most of the stuff of life happens on or within cell membranes. And every cell type that we know of on this planet, every living thing, is made of cells that have outer membranes and almost always inner membrane systems as well. So membranes are the action centers, the main action centers of our cells.
Excellent. And so I will definitely dive into some of the biochemistry and how PS is used. But it has been a supplement for a while. Could you talk a little bit about when was it first used as a supplement and what kind of history does it have?
Well, we've known that PS, well, no, I shouldn't say we, I wasn't around yet, but PS has been known to exist since the 1840s when uh, crude mixes of phospholipids were isolated from egg yolks and from the brains of animals. Uh, it was first isolated as a distinct substance in 1941, and clinical trials began with PS in Europe in the 1980s. And at this point, there are more than 30 double-blind trials that have been published with PS. I've popularized it, I've got involved with it and popularized it since 1994. And PS is really a model health span and lifespan nutrient.
So, actually, one thing you said is it's not a fat. So, what is the difference between a phospholipid and a fat? I mean, phospholipid has the word lipid in it, which makes it sound like a
Yes, I was
fat.
afraid you'd never ask. So fats are lipids, but all lipids are not fats. So fats are a glycerol molecule with three fatty acids tacked onto the molecule. So hence we call them triglycerides. Uh, Phospholipids have two fatty acids on the glycerol, but then they have another group which has nothing to do with fats and which we call colloquially a head group. And the most common head groups of phospholipids are choline, which makes phosphatidylcholine, uh, serine, which makes phosphatidylserine or PS that we're talking about today, ethanolamine, which makes phosphatidylethanolamine, and inositol, which makes phosphatidylinositol. And all of these are far more metabolically utilized than fats per se. These are substances that are much more um, broadly part of our metabolism than fats are.
So, if we look at phosphatidylserine, thank you. That makes that a bit clearer.
Yeah,
So,
we
if
can
we
call
look,
it PS if you
if
like. We
we
usually call it PS.
let's call it PS. Yeah. So, if we look at PS, before we dive into the biochemistry, so what kind of benefits have we seen? So, you talked about some trials, RCT trials that have been conducted with PS. So, what benefits do we see with supplementing with PS?
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me just talk a little bit more about what it's actually doing.
Yeah.
Uh, because there have been thousands of basic science publications on PS, even before the clinical trials began. So it's fundamental to our life processes at the level of our cells. It's essential for the cell membrane. So every cell membrane that we know of in nature contains PS, down to the simplest blue-green bacteria. Um, it's essential for the mitochondria within our cells that generate more than 95% of our life energy. It's fundamental for our cells to sense and respond to signals coming from the outside. It's also a source of smaller molecules that are released from our cells and go out to carry signals to surrounding cells and sometimes to circulate with the blood and reach multiple organs. It's fundamental to functioning of all the chemical transmitters in the nervous system because the connections between the brain cells, what we call synapses, of which we have trillions in the brain and elsewhere in the nervous system, those connections fundamentally require PS in order to work. So all of the chemical transmitters work via synapses, and none of them could work if PS was not present. So that is some of what we know about what PS does. But in recent years, another interesting function also emerged, which is particularly relevant to health span and lifespan, which is that uh, PS is kept in a certain position within the cell membrane. Um, Special enzymes exist that do that. Energy is continually being spent to maintain PS in that position within the membrane. But when a cell gets weak, when a cell begins to run low on energy and becomes less efficient, it can no longer hold PS in that position and the PS flips to the outer side of the membrane where it then faces the outer environment. And then immune cells that are in the area pick this up. They sense the PS, they identify the PS on the outer side of the cell, and something clicks that tells the immune cells, this cell is done, we have to dispose of it. Whereupon they come on the scene and they destroy that cell. And this function is crucial in order for us to be able to maintain healthy populations of cells and to essentially keep things tidy in our tissues and organs where we don't have sick and dying cells getting in the way. So, as you may have thought about before, nature can be quite unforgiving, and PS is one tool that's used for cells that have had their time and are done. Another function of that actually I just learned about recently, to my chagrin, is that PS seems to be also involved in this phenomenon called synaptic pruning. So in when we're young, we have lots and lots and lots of synapses. Babies have a whole lot more synapses than they're going to have when they become mature. Adolescents, all through adolescence, we're sorting out what synapses we really need to have efficient brain function and what synapses we don't need. And it seems that PS is involved in that pruning function. So synapses that become superfluous will have PS sticking out on the outside, and immune cells come along and take away those synapses so that we can have the most efficient um, energy utilization, the most efficient circuitry in the mature brain and nervous system. Now, with all of these fundamental things that I've talked about in our life processes, um, clinically, we found that PS benefits memory and other cognitive functions in older people. And, when we talk about clinical findings, we have to keep in mind that we only find, we only can talk about findings when we've done the trial. So it may well be that as time goes by, we'll find other benefits from PS. But at this point, the most established benefit is for memory and other cognitive function in older people, other higher brain functions, for um, for mood and coping with stress in younger people, for improved attention, impulsivity, and behavior in children and adolescents with ADHD. And interestingly, ADHD children and adolescents tend to have poor synaptic pruning. So it may be that when we can give them additional PS, their synaptic pruning may become more efficient. That may be.
So just so while we were talking about the biochemistry, um, so PS sits on the inner membrane normally, right? And
Well,
it
well, the membrane has two faces. It
Mhm.
has two layers. One layer faces the outside environment. The other layer faces the inside, the cytoplasm. And PS lives on the inside membrane. Once it leaves the inside, I'm sorry, the inside face of the membrane. That's very important to understand because there are other membranes inside the cell. So once the cell is not able to maintain it on the inner face, it flips over to the outer face. And then immune cells patrolling along will sense it in the outer face and proceed to destroy that cell.
how much what's the percentage of the cell membrane that is PS? Do we have any idea?
It can get to about 10% of the phospholipids in brain synapses. So, so the membrane, then the two layers of the membrane has continuous phospholipids into which also are inserted or interspersed with um, more or less dense collections of proteins. So we can measure its occurrence among the phospholipids, and it's about 10% in the synaptic membranes. But in the synapses, it plays a crucial role because it serves as an anchor for certain proteins. I'm getting a bit technical here, but it serves as an anchor for certain proteins that enable the fusion between inner sets of membranes, the synaptic vesicles, and the outer membrane of the cell in order to release the transmitters. So within the nerve cells, we have bundles, we have membranes that enclose bundles of transmitters, and the transmitters can only be released once those membranes fuse with the outer cell membrane. And PS is crucial within that interface of the outer membrane in order for the fusion to occur. So that is why we say that without PS, we wouldn't have any neurotransmitter activity, wouldn't have any neurotransmitter function.
Right. And that's how, I guess, the different brain neurons communicate to each other is across these synapses. And so basically,
Yeah,
to be able to think or to
yeah,
do anything, you need
yeah. We
PS.
have about we have some 30 some billion neurons, and each neurons have an average about 1,000 synapses each. So we're talking about on the order of 30 or more trillion synapses. And those are the basic functional unit of the brain in the sense that unless a synapse works, then one nerve cell cannot communicate with another nerve cell. So the chemical transmitter activity, the electrical transmitter activity in the brain, and by the way, the brain runs around 10 watts. If you're interested in that, it's about equivalent to a 10-watt bulb. So, but
I had not thought about that.
but it does burn a tremendous amount of energy, so that while we're at rest, about 20% of our energy is being consumed by our brain. When we're working, the way I'm working now, the way you may be working, we can be burning as much as 50% of all of our energy. And I know that when I've done a presentation like this for an hour or two, at the end of it, I'm tired. And we always sort of wonder, at least when I was younger, I wondered, how come mentally I can get so tired? I haven't done any physical labor. Well, it turns out that we're burning a tremendous amount of ATP in our brains, even at rest.
So you did mention that PS also helps mitochondrial performance. Do we know
Yes.
how it does that?
Yes. No, it doesn't necessarily stimulate or enhance mitochondrial performance as far as we know, but it's crucial to the functioning of the mitochondria because the mitochondria have double membranes. They have an outer membrane which faces the cytoplasm, and then they have an inner membrane which is loaded with proteins that set up the energy generation. And PS is important for those two sets of membranes of the mitochondria to work. So PS is continually being provided to the mitochondria from neighboring membrane systems, and PS is then potentially converted into other phospholipids that are just as important for the mitochondria. So we don't know that PS by itself would enhance mitochondrial functioning, but having sufficient PS is crucial to having efficient mitochondrial performance. And it's interesting that a study was done in which PET imaging was used, that's positron emission tomography, was used to image zones of the brain in people who had been given labeled glucose. So the PET imaging essentially measured the uptake and utilization of glucose in the brain to make energy. And um, after taking PS for a few weeks, the generation of energy in the brain was increased. In this case, in a woman who had Alzheimer's. And so I had the before and after. The before image of PET was, really bland, really low energy. And then after she'd been on PS for 3 weeks, the brain had literally lighted up. There was more energy being generated across the brain, on the order of 12 to 18% more energy in that Alzheimer's brain.
That is encouraging that it can make Alzheimer's brains more active. That's really great. Okay,
Yeah, and definitely not a magic bullet.
no,
Don't I don't believe in magic bullets. If I did believe in magic bullets, I might think that PS would be one, but no. PS is just one of thousands of um, molecular players in our life processes. But when we do clinical trials, when we do properly designed, double blind, randomized, controlled clinical trials, and we see benefit, then we have to take it seriously. And I want to caution your audience that lots of people are trying to sell you lots of supplements. But the question is, have those supplements been put through clinical trials and shown to provide benefit? If they're not, then you may want to consider, you know, because with the vitamins and minerals, there's not much benefit unless you have an outright deficiency or an insufficiency. And so lots of people are purchasing supplements that aren't necessarily proven to help them.
so that's how PS works. That's kind of the biological function of, well, some of the biological functions of PS. So there have been clinical trials with PS and looking at its so looking at in healthy people or in people with mild cognitive impairment.
Well, this is a very good question. Now, that would depend on how you define healthy. Um, Arguably, the breakthrough clinical trial with PS was done with healthy people over the age of 50 who were complaining of problems with their memory. So these were people who did not have dementia or any other, didn't have Alzheimer's or any other form of dementia, who had no diagnosed disease, but who were definitely having trouble in their daily life with their memory. And the research group, which was led by Dr. Thomas Crook, um, bless his memory, um, drawn from the US National Institutes of Health, from Stanford University, and from Vanderbilt University, and from a group in Italy, um, developed some very elegant uh, online or interactive, video interactive means of assessing name recognition, name face recognition, recall of telephone numbers, um, learning and recalling paragraphs, and finding misplaced objects, and so on. And so they did a placebo-controlled double-blind trial um, with these with this population, and they found that PS, beginning at 3 weeks and up to 3 months, made a substantial difference in name recall and name face recall and paragraph recall and some of the other measures, and in overall cognitive performance. So although these people did not have a disease, their poor memory performance on the psychometric testing suggested that they could be at risk of moving towards dementia. The group then did another clinical trial on individuals who were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, early Alzheimer's, and they found that those with the least severe Alzheimer's did show improvement in their willingness to socialize, in their activities of daily living, and in their memory. But they cautioned that these were individuals with just mild Alzheimer's because, as we know, as Alzheimer's advances, there is so much um, nervous tissue lost that it makes it very, very hard to visualize rebuilding in the later stages. So, so the FDA was subsequently petitioned, and this was not for the standard structure function claims that you see on dietary supplement bottles. This was for more advanced claims called qualified health claims, which have to have a much higher level of proof than basic structure function claims. And FDA put us through hoops, but they eventually agreed on two qualified health claims for PS. After thoroughly reviewing the data, they announced their willingness, and of course, this is in bureaucratese, but their willingness to exercise enforcement discretion to allow claims that PS may reduce risk of memory decline or cognitive dysfunction or severe dementia in the elderly. So what they said basically was that if you use this type of language, we leave you alone. We won't harass you. And so far, it seems they've kept their promise because I haven't seen any warning letters about supplements containing PS. There haven't been any legislative actions around PS. It's nice and quiet, which may be why it doesn't make the headlines as much because practically every authentic brain supplement contains PS.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for my audience, like just supporting the aging brain and in general, like your performance, your memory goes down. So yeah, it is we wouldn't I mean, I understand that it may not be able to help like advanced dementia, but just supporting your cognitive ability is a key thing. Key is a key benefit.
Yeah, and we did have that little clue from that one imaging study that it has a capability of improving energy generation in the brain. So now that was at 500 milligrams a day for 3 weeks. It's safe up to 600 milligrams and beyond. In the what's 1994 to now, 31 years. I haven't got one case of PS creating an adverse effect. You know, PS is widespread in our foods, although in very small amounts, and I know we'll get to that. So the idea of it creating an intolerance or allergy reaction is pretty remote, and I haven't seen any adverse effects so far. But I have good news for you as well. The omega 3s uh, make headlines all the time. And one of the things you brought up with me before was how does PS, how do PS and the omega 3s relate? Well, the fact is that the omega 3s are positioned within our cell membranes. And of course, there's thousands of publications on what levels we need in the cell membranes, etc. But the way that omega 3s are positioned in our cell membranes is that they have to be plugged into phospholipids. That's what anchors them in the cell membrane. So they don't just go in the cell membrane and sit there on their own. They have to be part of a phospholipid molecule. So each phospholipid molecule has two tail groups, and one or both of those tail groups can be omega 3s. And two major phospholipids carry the bulk of the omega 3s. One is PS and the other is PE. We don't have PE available as a highly concentrated supplement. So PS is the next option for that. And I worked with a physician um, at one point, Dr. Reeser from Kansas City, some time back, in giving PS to kids with ADHD, not in a double-blind trial, but in a clinical setting. And she believed that she saw that kids who got omega-3s along with the PS did better in terms of improvement of their ADHD. And there's other lines of evidence that suggest that uh, by taking PS along with omega-3s, we have a better chance of improving and optimizing our brain functions.
Yes. So the cell membrane, okay, it's a phospholipid bilayer. So all those all those molecules are phospholipids. Okay, and then the phospholipid has two fats, and so if
Not
they
not
can
fats, not
oh,
fats, fatty acids. Important to
fatty
discriminate.
acids.
Fatty acids. These are long chain hydrocarbons that are not fats. They are components of fats, but they're not fats.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, and so they're a fatty acid, and they can be, and so a phospholipid can have two of these, and one of these could be an omega-3, which would then sit in the membrane and do the good things that omega-3 does.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Okay, so as well as memory, I think that PS has been looked at in terms of mood or it's damping down stress. Is this correct?
Yeah, and yes, it has. And you'll see claims about PS from you know various brands and you know parties out there that are just not accurate. But one way that it does seem to help is with with um, with with college students or with sort of middle-aged adults, if you subject them to an intense, stressful task after they've been taking PS for a while, they seem to cope with that stress better. And there are two concrete examples. One is these college students, university students, um, made to, oh, I just thought of a third example too. But the first example is university students made to do challenging mental arithmetic in their heads, no calculators. What may have happened to you and me when we were kids in school, right? We didn't have calculators, right? We had to do
Correct.
this stuff in our heads. So the test was hard enough that um, it would be challenging for them. And they would sometimes emerge from the testing quite frustrated and in a rather negative mood. Well, among those who received PS and not a placebo, um, their emergence from the test was in a much more positive mood and a much more sort of overall controlled and positive feeling than if they had not got PS. Another trial that was done was having students recite Immanuel Kant backwards. And
Well,
I looked up Immanuel Kant and I found out that Immanuel Kant was a very complicated writer. So they would have to recite, to read from Immanuel Kant backwards at a fairly fast pace, and that would be extremely stressful. And PS helped with that too. And then a third example, perhaps maybe a more practical example, golfers. Golfers, are under some degree of stress, I guess. I don't play golf, but I have friends who do. Some degree of stress to, especially when they're driving, to get the drive straight down the fairway, etc. And so this trial was designed in which golfers got either PS or a placebo, and their drives were quantified. That is the amount of drift to either side. And it was found that those who were getting PS would drive more accurately and essentially perform better um, at their golfing. Now, these are just three individual trials, but it seems to suggest that PS may have utility for people who are under a fairly high degree of acute stress. But whether PS is a primary choice for stress is not clear. Um, but this may be some component of its benefits for those people who may choose to take it.
Is there any, so yeah, is there any other suspected potential benefit of PS that you're aware of? Um, yeah, because I certainly understand. And the trials show a very narrow thing. They show it helps with memory, or it may help with stress. Is there anything else that?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that the findings on memory are narrow because the findings extend to memory, learning, attention, other aspects of focus, behavior, and in the Alzheimer's patients, willingness to socialize. That is to be said to be less self-conscious and to be willing to go out there and talk with people, even though you may be defensive about your cognitive function. So, and of course, there are um, hundreds of millions of people around the world who are struggling with their cognitive function and who face cognitive decline, possibly catastrophic decline as they get older. So this is already a huge application. And, the ADHD population is at least 10% of all children, at least in the United States. In Europe, the incidence seems to be similar. And about half of those will continue to have ADHD when they become adults. So again, these are very substantial populations who could benefit from PS.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking more of the application. So certainly, like cognitive improvement is a very wide area and is very much appreciated. Any help we can get there. So if we look at sources of of PS, so we did talk a little bit about getting it from the diet. So
Yeah,
what? Yeah,
there's very little in plants. Plants, I think plants don't have much in the way of cell. Their cell membranes are organized uh, similarly to ours. The basic organization is the same, but I guess maybe that's why plants aren't very cognitive. They don't have a lot of PS and they don't have synapses, as far as I know. So plant foods have only a little bit. Muscle has quite a bit. Um, Organ meats have some. And at one point, I had to figure out what a more or less average Western diet would provide. And I came up with on the order of 75 to 100 milligrams of PS per day from the usual diet. And there are no lifestyle ways to increase PS in the body. There are lifestyle ways that'll probably destroy it. The all the different types of toxins that people take into their bodies, but there's no way that I know of to increase PS levels in the body
are we? Is there any
besides,
possibility that
besides diet and supplements. I'm sorry.
all
Yeah.
right. No, no. So is there any possibility that we could be deficient in PS? I mean, I'm thinking if you're a vegan, right, and so you're only eating plant products, is it
I thought
possible?
I thought about this a lot, and the way our cell membranes tend to operate is that they they increase their mass. They have to increase their mass in order for our cells to make new cells, right? So if one cell is going to make two cells, then you have to have twice the amount of membrane. Otherwise, it's not necessarily going to work. But um, as the membranes are expanding, they're being provided with new phospholipids from existing membranes. So there has to be there have to be phospholipids produced um, at that location. And I suspect that what happens is that when there's not sufficient PS, we simply don't get as much new membrane being made as we should. And this could be a factor with synapses because synapses are continually being turned over in the brain. I mean, they're very active energetically, so they can get exhausted or damaged or whatever. And so it may be that if we're not making sufficient PS, then our ability to keep up with our synaptic um, quota, so to speak, is impaired, and then we tend to lose synaptic density, which is known to be a major issue in the decline of memory and other cognitive function with age. We know that the brain loses synaptic density, and as the synapses are lost, the entire volume of the brain tends to shrink. So that may be a factor, but we don't know of any deficiency state of PS, not like we would know about, for say, scurvy from deficiency of vitamin E, C, for example.
And can we make it internally, and what do we make it from? What kind of precursors?
Our cells do make PS. They make it by doing complex exchanges of the head groups. So all the phospholipids then have a head piece, a middle piece, and the two fatty acid tails. So you can swap out a choline head group from PC and add serine into that and make it into PS. That's how most of the PS that the body makes is produced. But that takes energy and it takes different sets of enzymes. So it may be that in some individuals, people who are not having, don't have good energetic status, whose mitochondria are maybe not working very well, who are not digesting and absorbing well. It may be that those types of people are not able to keep up with their internal synthesis of PS. So that's why I introduced it as possibly a conditionally essential nutrients so that some people may not need to have it at all, whereas some people may benefit from getting more of it from the diet or from supplements.
Okay. I understand that there is a difference between the PS that comes from animals and the PS that comes from plants. Uh, is that correct? And does it matter which one we have?
There's actually there's actually differences in PS uh, from one point in the membrane to another, and between one cell and the next, between one mitochondrion and its neighbors, etc. The reason being that one of the main functions of the membrane phospholipids is to provide a certain microenvironment for the proteins in the membranes. And this microenvironment is to a certain extent controlled by the nature of the tails on the phospholipids. So there are enzymes that exquisitely vary the tail composition of PS. So in organs like the liver and muscle, for example, PS tends to have more of the so-called saturated fatty acids, which are not the omega-3s. In the brain, interestingly, PS has a rather high content of polyunsaturated fatty acids, most notably omega-3 DHA and EPA. It seems that synaptic function, the functioning of the synapses, requires for whatever reason, that much of the PS carry EPA and DHA on the molecule. So it seems that as we go from membrane to membrane, cell to cell, tissue to tissue, organ to organ, the PS tail content is regulated to match the requirements of the proteins that are present in its environment. So, and experimentally, you can shut off or turn on a protein, a membrane protein, by changing the fatty acid configuration of the PS. And in addition to that, as we get it from our foods, there are enzymes. We have digestive enzymes that right away knock off one of the two tails. Sometimes enzymes knock off both of the two tails. And then once the PS is absorbed, it will then be tailored by by targeted addition of specific tails onto that particular molecule. So depending on the requirement of that cell at that moment, the PS may receive a saturated fatty acid, one or more, or it may receive omega 3s, or it may receive omega 6s, or omega 7s, or omega 9s. And by the way, don't let anyone ever tell you that omega 6s are harmful. Omega 6s are absolutely essential to our healthy functioning. It's the balance of omega 6s and omega 3s in our diet that can throw off the balance within our membrane phospholipids. But we absolutely need omega 6s in our diet, just as we need omega 3s.
Uh, if we want to supplement with PS, what would a protocol look like? How often, what kind of dosage and how often should you take it?
Well, most of the clinical trials have been done with 300 milligrams a day. When we started off, PS was really expensive. And some of the companies decided just to offer 100 milligrams as the basic serving. And there are a couple of trials in which 100 milligrams seem to work okay. There are other trials in which 200 milligrams worked okay, but I want to encourage your audience to take PS at 300 milligrams because that is the best documented fully effective level of dosing. You can take it any time of day. Taking it with food is better because although it's not a fat, it tends to mix well with fats and be better absorbed in the presence of fats. So taking it with food is important. It doesn't interfere with sleep, doesn't seem to interfere with any other nutrients or drugs. It just you just take it, and it's I think of it as a kind of brain health insurance, a kind of health insurance for your brain, in the sense that you take it and you hope and expect that it will perhaps buy you a longer health span for those synapses that are so very important to us knowing who we are and being able to do what we do.
Is there any way to measure your level? I mean, even in the lab, but is there any way that and you can kind of make some you can ascertain your current level?
Yeah, there are ways, but they're not commercialized as far as I can tell. It's pretty sophisticated analytical methodology, and it doesn't mean very much because the levels that are in the blood don't necessarily reflect the levels that are in the tissues. I suppose it has been done to look at biopsies of PS from muscle, etc., and that might say something. But but I think that looking for deficiency states is not going to really pan out at this point. It just doesn't seem to be in the cards.
Yeah, it sounds too complicated and not really. worth it. And yes,
Well,
it would
if
need to
you
be a
even
biopsy.
send if you send a PS supplement product to one of the many routine labs and ask them to analyze it, they may come back with a totally erroneous measurement because the most the most consistent way to do it is with a method called NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, which most routine labs don't have. So it's actually very hard to analyze for.
Okay.
And I did quite a bit of that when I was more involved with PS.
Okay. So if we kind of move on from PS to kind of brain health in general, because I think you've been looking at brain health. I saw that you were working with Dr. Amen previously. Um,
Yes, yes, and before that, I've been publishing on brain health ever since 1994 when I started working with PS. You see, my PhD thesis at the University of California at Berkeley was on cell membranes. And so PS as a cell membrane nutrient just immediately fascinated me. And because PS was so important for the brain, I had to get educated about brain function. Meanwhile, the stress of my life was quite challenging for me mentally. And so I became an expert on supplements for the brain. And I've continued um, to work with Dr. Amen and his group using that expertise, as well as on other types of projects. I've designed lots and lots of supplements for brain function, not all of them including PS, but but always, Richard, with the caveat that ingredients that I use must be proven consistently from double-blind clinical trials. If there aren't clinical trials, I'm not interested. I tell the supplier, come back when you have clinical trials and then we can talk again. Because I want to be on firm ground when I recommend any ingredient or any supplement product to people out there who are looking to spend their hard-earned money.
mm,
Having said that, there's lots of other stuff that individuals can do for their brain health besides taking PS. One is their diet. And the closest diet um, to what we could call a brain diet is what's now called the mind diet, which is an improvement on the Mediterranean diet. It emphasizes, compared to the Mediterranean diet, it emphasizes berries over just eating any fruit. It emphasizes green leafy veggies over veggies in general. It restricts bread. It adds in poultry along with fish and no dairy allowed. I, in particular, have to also be careful about my food intolerances. And I suspect that many people out there who are having issues will find that if they look at how they manage foods, they would need to further tailor any particular dietary pattern for their own needs. So I tailor the mind diet for my needs. Um, Another issue is that one aspect of lifestyle that has been consistently shown to improve brain function and slow cognitive decline is physical exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, breaking a sweat for a total of at least 2.5 hours a week. But then as well, isometric exercise, that is weight bearing exercise to help you to maintain your muscle mass. Because as you maintain your muscle mass, that gives feedback to the brain as well, that the brain should keep itself going because you're not about to just dry up and die. So physical exercise, very important. Mental exercise, all kinds of mental exercises can be helpful, but the main thing is to keep being mentally productive. Retirement overall is a very bad idea. Very bad idea. Very important to keep being mentally productive, to do what you love, to keep your brain engaged. And then, as far as lifestyle goes, any of those so-called recreational drugs, including cannabis, is toxic. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Any of those foreign substances that you're smoking or taking into your body have a chance to damage the brain because the brain is very, very sensitive to what we call free radical and other oxidative toxins. It's also very sensitive to air pollution and to lead in water, other heavy metals, all of that stuff. So it's important to live a very, very clean lifestyle.
What are your thoughts on caffeine in particular? Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I revisit caffeine from time to time. I think a moderate amount of caffeine actually does enhance mental sharpness. There are clinical trials that show that very clearly. So I don't know how much caffeine is too much, but moderate amounts I think are reasonable. For most people, there's no need to be caffeine free, except for myself. I've had an intolerance for caffeine since I was a child, so I can't have any coffee at all.
Ah,
But
okay.
caffeine, I'm not necessarily against.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so we didn't really any other supplements that are helpful for brain function, or that, well, I guess, are there other deficiencies that you should be thinking about that may impact your brain function that may be common?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Richard. You know, people have supplements recommended to them, right? I mean, their friends tell them, I took this thing and it really helped me. It's fantastic. You should take it. Or, they see these ads, right? Everywhere. Take this, take that. Fact is that just about everyone in this society, whether or not they think they're healthy, is going to be getting insufficient amounts of one or another of the vitamins and essential minerals. The modern food supply is deficient in a number of these essential nutrients. And however sophisticated our cells may be in managing the PS levels and distribution and the omega 3s and all of that stuff, if our cells cannot make energy, then they're stuck at the starting line. And so I strongly recommend to everyone that they take a good multiple vitamin mineral. And for one thing, it should not contain oxides of magnesium or zinc or copper because the oxides are very poorly absorbed. This is a scandal that still has yet to be revealed. Um, there are reasons why oxide is used, it saves money, etc., but it doesn't get well absorbed. So a high quality multiple, at least 5,000 IU of vitamin D, and at least 1,000 milligrams a day of EPA and DHA, omega-3 EPA and DHA. Okay?
Hmm.
So that's sort of the foundational program for everyone, no matter what their age, no matter how well they're eating, no matter how clean a lifestyle they're living. That's foundational. Then now, if they want to add on additional health insurance for their brain or for any other organ system, they should look for ingredients that have a proven clinical track record and which, of course, are proven to be safe. So my two next favorite specific brain supplements are the synapse standardized supplement from Bacopa and Huperzine A from the Chinese moss. And I don't have any financial links to any of these suppliers, nor do I to any PS supplier, but these are very well validated supplements for the brain. Um, the mushroom called Hericium erinaceus or lion's mane also can be very helpful. It's very expensive, and you have to get the authentic lion's mane. Sometimes there are labels that have lion's mane on them, but when you look at the supplement facts box, you find that it's a blend of lion's mane with something else. So you need authentic Hericium erinaceus lion's mane to help your brain, and you need at least 1,000 milligrams of it per day.
Lion's mane. I've heard of lion's mane, not something that I've ever tried.
Yeah, well, it's a weird looking mushroom. The body of the mushroom is all sort of pimply and stuff, and it's said to look like a lion's mane. By the way, before I forget, PS is also fine for people who are pregnant, women who are pregnant or breastfeeding, no problem at all.
That's true. Actually, I was going to ask, are there any contraindications? Is there anyone who should not take PS for
Not
any
at all.
reason?
Not at all. It seems to be perfectly safe from all of these clinical trials, some of which looked at routine clinical measures. There's no indication that PS has any adverse effects on blood distributions and other measures of health. Um, One issue for people who are trying to save their brain is that uh, cardiovascular risk factors must be controlled. Every cardiovascular risk factor, including hypertension, is a risk factor for dementia. So the better you manage your heart and circulation is the lower your risk of declining into catastrophic memory loss.
And also high blood glucose is also, I believe,
Yeah,
very
high
bad.
blood sugar as well. Yeah, yeah. So there are classic risk factors for dementia, and when I talk about clean lifestyle, I mean all of that. So those of us who really want to be on the planet for a while, we have the tools now, thankfully, to get ourselves educated about the risks that we face from having some of these standard measures of health get out of whack. So hypertension and blood sugar, those types of things, insulin resistance, all of those things can be managed by the individual making a commitment. It doesn't even need to it doesn't require spending a lot of money. It requires a commitment to wanting to have a long health span and an even longer lifespan, so that you can justify being on the planet at all, I suppose. So
Yes. Okay, Dr. Kidd, uh, anything else on PS or brain health that you would like to mention that perhaps we didn't get to?
no, there's nothing that I think is major to bring up. I suppose um, the issue of eggs and egg yolks. Eggs are, of course, a bit in demand right now. They've got a bit more expensive, but have no doubt about it. Eggs are an excellent food, and the yolks, especially, are loaded with phospholipids, including PS. They're also loaded with nutrients like lutein and zeaxanthin, which are also cell membrane nutrients and which are essential for vision as well as for brain function. So it's important that we seriously consider to have eggs as part of our diet and to not just consume egg whites.
Good. Yes, I love eggs. Um, so, okay, Dr. Kidd, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. So I suppose in parting, Richard, I could say that um, it's been great to talk with you today about PS or phosphatidylserine, and it's an affordable nutrient. Some of us may need it as a supplement. It definitely helps to preserve our brain function into later life, which makes for a broader health span as well as More longevity, a longer lifespan. So I strongly recommend it to your viewers.
Thank you so much.